Greetings, friends. It's your Chapo for now. It's me, Will. I'm back. Apologies for my absence on the earlier episode this week, but I took some time off to ghostwrite Ice Cube's Twitter account. That's what Felix is currently doing right now. So for today, it's just me, Matt, and Amber for you. But you know, we've got there's some good tweets coming soon. But yeah, aside that little side project, we put together an episode for you today that I think sort of dovetails nicely with, once again, our Vincent Bevins interview, the Olof Palme assassination, and you know, sort of what he was talking about in the sort of 1980s, 70s, 80s, this whole kind of Cold War sort of anti-communist spider web of intelligence agencies, terrorist groups, assassinations, a kind of like a global Operation Condor.
Yeah.
That for this case, we're bringing you a little bit of lost history regarding that, Hollywood, Jack Abramoff, Dolph Lundgren, and the film Red Scorpion.
Yes.
A very little seen action movie released in 1988, directed by Joseph Zito, responsible for such other classics as Chuck Norris's Missing in Action and Chuck Norris's Invasion USA. But we want to talk about this movie because, you know, the hot story this week, well, it was a hot story this week that Sweden was going to, after 34 years, I guess, open up the books on their final judgment on the assassination of their former Prime Minister, Olof Palme. Sorry.
Like a hand.
Olaf Palme. He was
Palme.
a shit poster, and we loved him.
Olof Palme.
Yes.
Yeah, so like before we get into the connection between disgraced lobbyist Jack Abramoff and the Dolph Lundgren action film that he produced called Red Scorpion, and it's just sort of shady connections to, like I said, this whole kind of global kind of, I don't know, anti-communist spider web, like a global Operation Condor. Matt, why don't you take us through the connections to that and the assassination of Sweden's former Prime Minister Olof Palme?
Okay, so first of all, I don't know if any of this is true, but it's all useful to think about, just and can help you get us there, I guess I'd say. So what happened? So Olof Palme was a social democrat, a longtime prime minister of Sweden, who was in the 80s on the forefront of the apartheid divestment and sanctioning movement, trying to organize support among Western governments to isolate economically the apartheid South African government as part of a broader attempt that he was paramount in to create a sort of a socialism with a human face that would directly challenge the most awful and inhumane elements of like the global capitalist order, which in Africa was exemplified by the apartheid South African government, which was very closely allied with the Reagan administration and the state of Israel and South African junta governments that were carrying out Condor at the same time. He was assassinated after leaving a movie theater, walking down the streets of Stockholm in 1986, shot in the back. No one was ever, one man was convicted. The conviction was later overturned. There was a bunch of investigations, and eventually they just threw their hands up, and it kind of just became one of those weird things. You know, the sitting prime minister of a country murdered on one of the busiest streets in Stockholm, and nobody knowing who did it for 35 years.
Also, to point out that he was in the Swedish Social Democratic Party, just a side note, Social Democrat in Sweden doesn't mean the same thing it does here. He was a left-wing anti-imperialist politician.
Yeah, no, he was a guy who he had been also a big Vietnam War opponent and tried to use Sweden's position diplomatically to press the United States to
supported like third world development rather than like third world investment.
Exactly.
Like, good on the thing.
Yeah, and there's been a ton of suspicions over the years of who did it. A lot of people say maybe the CIA or the South Africans. Turkey has always claimed it was the PKK, but they think that they did everything. But one of the big suspects was this guy named Stig Engstrom, who was a dude who worked at an insurance company near the place where the killing happened. Didn't have a very good alibi, lied about where he was that night. A number of witnesses identified him as the person who did it, but he was never convicted. And in 2000, he committed suicide.
So they say.
Yeah. And the Swedish prosecutor came out and had their big press conference to say, we're now willing to say he was the one. This guy did it. And now wipe their hands of it. Now, why he did it is not a thing that they talk about. And that has been a big question mark. And there is now that he has been fingered by the state, there is now a new investigation of him and his ties. And there are claims that he was connected to the Swedish branch of the Gladio Stay Behind network of NATO coordinated groups, mostly radically right wing in Europe during the Cold War.
Now, also, like, I mean, the first time I'd heard about this is that there were intimations that the famous Swedish author Stieg Larsson, the author of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, he was a journalist before he was a novelist, and at the time of his unexpected death was apparently working on an expose that would tie the assassination of Olof Palme to far-right groups in Sweden, and then like who are also connected to the South African apartheid intelligence apparatus.
Boss, as it was called.
Boss. And it just like sort of like even like what Vincent Bevins was talking to us about. It was like the whole Cold War was sort of fought on this myth of like monolithic global communism, like a global communist movement, which is anything but, based on the historical record. But anti-communism itself was very much a monolithic, like directed, where all these different strands and sort of far-right terrorist groups and intelligence networks did collaborate with each other to carry out assassinations, bombings, things like that. And the South African military, like intelligence and military apparatus, were rumored to have been linked to like a whole slew of global assassinations all over the world of figures that had nothing to do with even campaigning against apartheid, but like they were, basically trigger men for this kind of like I said, the global Operation Condor.
Yeah.
Say what you will, it's really inspiring to see people just work together.
Yeah,
Put
exactly.
aside differences and work together.
No. As the walls were sort of closing in on apartheid, the apartheid government in the 80s went ham in an attempt to stave off the inevitable, and they did things like plant mail bombs and kill ANC leaders outside of the country, like Ruth First, for example. They've been accused recently of intentionally spreading AIDS through cutout medical clinics, causing plane crashes, and yes, also doing things on behest of other right-wing regimes as part of this coordinated operation. I mean, for example, the man who killed the guy who blew up Orlando Lederer in D.C. on behalf of the Pinochet regime was an American. He was not Chilean. So it was international. And not only was it international, it was so international, it had its own group. It had its own front pressure group called the World Anti-Communist League, which is, and Vincent Bevins talks about them in the Jakarta Method as one of the organizations that grew out of the reaction to third world independence and socialist movements in the 70s and 80s. And so they did things like coordinate assassinations, surveillance, big-time surveillance, sharing intelligence about each other's enemies, where they might live. And also, they had a cultural arm, too. They were also trying to win the battle for hearts and minds in addition to shooting people and blowing them up. And that is where Red Scorpion comes in.
Yeah. So, like I said, this was a very much unseen, poorly received action movie that came out in 1988. That is interesting to this regard because it was essentially part of this cultural like anti-communist propaganda effort, and it was produced, like I said, by a pretty famous figure, Jack Abramoff. And like this is like the
Dated
late
Lena Dunham.
Yeah. This is the late 80s, and like Abramoff was like, this was like at the tail end of the Reagan administration. There were a lot of these the right-wing groups that were sort of like the mushrooms that grew out of the corpse of that White House were by the end of the Reagan administration very disillusioned by what they saw as like Reagan's capitulation to the global communism and things like that. Like he wasn't as hawkish as they would have liked him to have been. They had coming out of the disgrace of the Iran-Contra hearings and then Oliver North going to jail. They felt like they were kind of on their back heels despite how much that they did get away with. And Abramoff himself he'd been president of the College Republicans and came out of that whole scene with like Ralph Reed and Grover Norquist and those guys. And he had done all these lobbying stuff, and then like he had in 1985 he founded something called the International Freedom Fund, which was a group that essentially was going to do lobbying on behalf of the apartheid South African government at a time when like that was becoming a big cause in America and the West, like divestment and boycott of South Africa and support for Mandela and the ANC. And he wanted to, he founded this group like on behalf of, like I said, basically every evil person and villain like in the continent of Africa and elsewhere, to support the what they viewed as like the only reliably anti-communist government in Africa. And so like he starts the IFF, the International Freedom Fund, and then a couple of years later he decides to try his hand at Hollywood. Him and his brother, of course, were both from Beverly Hills. They were both from Hollywood and like that community.
Townies, really.
Yeah, exactly. And he decided to he puts together this screenplay, and then gets funding for this movie. It was originally supposed to cost $8 million. It went twice over that. The whole movie that we just watched cost $16 million, and it is still pretty kind of unknown where the funding for this movie came from. But you can imagine, you can like fill in the gaps in your head with like the more we tell you about this. And essentially, this was filmed in what was then Southwest Africa, which is now the country of Namibia. And the whole production of this film involved like breaking a boycott of South Africa. And it's so like the movie is about a like Spetsnaz soldier who's like a Russian military advisor. It takes place in the a fictional country of Mombasa, which is supposed to be a stand-in for Angola. And like, but the thing was, like, the actual production of this movie violated a boycott of South Africa at the time, and was received its funding probably from the South African military or government. So much so,
pretty much,
that when you watch this movie, all of the military surplus in it, the jeeps and the tanks or whatever, and this, like I said, this very, very like C-rate knockoff of Rambo, were all from the South African military.
Yeah, and the Southwest Africa was at that point still essentially a puppet state, controlled by the apartheid government. Then
the International Freedom Fund, the stated goal was, quote, to foster individual freedom throughout the world by engaging in activities which promote the development of free and open societies based on the principles of free enterprise. And they were also, their goal, that was their stated goal, but the actual goal was to oppose the Anti-Apartheid Act and any sanctions on South Africa at a time when, by the second Reagan administration, they had all thought the old cadre had gone soft, both on nuclear disarmament and then also supporting allowing a boycott of such a staunch ally like South Africa.
You say that's their stated goal, but what they ended up doing very much serves their stated goal. Like in injecting neoliberalism into this or that place, or whatever, destabilizing economies. I mean, it is actually pretty good for the ruling class to have apartheid. Also, I have to point out that that is very close to some of the copy you read on the About Us for Open Societies Foundation.
Sorry, just a little bit more about the Abramoff's International Freedom Fund. Like he got on board like these other very rich guys in California who were entrepreneurs and also fanatical anti-communists. A lot of the same people that he had met through the college Republicans. They sort of took Abramoff under their wing. This guy named Jack Wheeler, and they wanted to support the Reagan doctrine of fighting communism, sort of wherever it showed up in the world. But they said no. I'm reading a quote here from Wheeler who says, "No Afghan knew where Nicaragua was, and no Contra knew where Angola was." So to solve that problem, in 1985, they set up. This is one of my favorite stories of this era. Abramoff and these guys organized this global anti-communist conference. In Angola at the Unita's headquarters, where they united guys from the Mujahideen, the Contras, Laotian rebels, all under the aegis of the Jonas Savimbi. Yeah. In Angola. Mac, can you speak a little bit on Savimbi?
So UNITA was this because there after the Portuguese left their colonies, Mozambique and Angola, which bordered the territory, the sphere of influence of the apartheid governments, after the Carnation Revolution in the 70s, which was a left-wing military coup, essentially, after which they said, fuck this, we're not fighting these wars anymore, and they handed the governments over to the Marxist-inspired guerrilla movements that had taken power, that had been fighting them, which was not acceptable to Pretoria, obviously, and so they helped stoke and support and arm and train their own rebel movements, much like the U.S. did in Nicaragua after the Contras kicked out Somoza. And one of the big ones was UNITA, run by this guy, Jonas Savimbi. So the entire time that he was running a very violent, bloody insurgency against the ruling Angolan government. He was doing it with the training, arming, funding of South African government and the U.S., also China, because they hated the Soviets. And so he was essentially a frontman for the for South African apartheid interests in this country to avoid what they were terrified of, which was the domino effect. Essentially, now that Angola is no longer controlled by a colonial power, then Southwest Africa, which is on the southern border there, which is now Namibia, would then become independent, and then they're losing their buffer with the rest of Black Africa that they were terrified of. So Savimbi was a South African operation, or he was part of a South African operation to hopefully overthrow the government there and put in someone that they could at least have some sort of control over.
And then of course, the Cuban army got involved as part of the Angolan Civil War. Like they sent Cuban troops to fight South Africans in Angola. So this is like the whole, and in this fictional country in the movie is just a stand-in for Angola, because it's like Russian and Cuban military advisors supporting the government of this fictional country.
Yes.
They're the bad guys of this film. And the good guys, of course, are the rebel leader is based on Savimbi, and it's just basically like the setup in Red Scorpion is sort of like what if it was actually the Soviet Union that assassinated Patrice Lumumba, essentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they turned Savimbi, a Savimbi type character into a anti-colonial freedom fighter instead of a literal puppet of a racist white regime, which is what he was.
So you want to talk about the movie itself?
Hell yes.
Yes.
All right, let's get into it.
Yes.
So like I said, it stars Dolph Lundgren, and he plays a Spetsnaz soldier. He's the elite of the elite. He is the top Russian military commando who is given and like in the opening scene is he's brought into a smoke-filled room filled with like the Russian generals and Cuban military advisors, and he's given a tight deck about the nation of Mumbaka and its sort of like its indigenous revolutionary struggle against its awful Cuban Russian-led regime, and he's given a mission to infiltrate the country and assassinate the leader of this revolution, the Savimbi character. And then as soon as he comes in, they're like, oh well, Colonel so and so, our friend from Cuba. And the Cuban guy extends his hand out to Dolph, who just leaves him hanging, and then refuses a cigar from him as well. So he's already not fully on board for these, this foreign interference in another country. So he's sent to this fictional country as a military advisor, but he's really going there to do an assassination to kill the leader of this democratic uprising. Like I said, and then he's sent to a base that I will be referring to as the Andrew Cuomo base.
Yeah.
Because they keep calling it's like Cuomo base or something similar to that. Just for the purposes of this show, we'll be calling it the Andrew Cuomo Forward Military Operating Base. Let's just talk about some of the other cast members in this movie. We've got a Blade Runner reunion of one of my favorite character actors of all time, M. Emmett Walsh, who has looked one of those classic actors who has looked old since they were 30.
Yeah.
So you're seeing this movie from 1988 and he looks the same as he does now, and you're sort of like, damn, how long has this guy been around? Emmett Walsh still alive.
Yeah.
He was on this season of Righteous Gemstones.
Yeah.
So he's still alive. And then the other actor, Brian James, who was also in Blade Runner as the Wake Up, Time to Die, doing one of the weirdest Russian accents
very,
ever
very
conceived
bad.
of in this
a
movie.
lot of terrible Russian accents.
There's
in
a
this
lot
film.
of Dolph's was actually pretty good.
It was better than the other, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have as much dialogue. That helped.
Dolph has about 10 lines of dialogue in this
Mostly
movie.
he does the Tom Hardy thing of grunting and staring.
A lot of grunting, a lot of staring.
I mean, he's there to look like just this a slab of marble
He's
with
there to
blonde
be
hair.
a sculpture, like a human sculpture.
So and then so essentially it begins and it's Dolph has been he's been assigned to the Cuomo base, but he's not there really as a military advisor. He's got a secret mission, which is to ingratiate himself to the friend and close advisor to the revolutionary leader that he's supposed to assassinate. And he does that by getting drunk one night and shooting up a bar.
Are you out of your mind?
No. Just out of bullets.
And getting arrested by his own military and thrown in the brig with like his contact or the guy he's supposed to sort of gain the trust of, who will lead him to the,
because he's like the second in command for the big rebel leader, and the idea is he will ingratiate himself to them so that he'll lead them to the base, the hidden base with the rebels, and then kill them for them.
So yeah, he gets drunk, he picks a fight with a Czech guy, and he's like, Czech pig, and then he just he lets the Czech guy punch him in his slab of granite stomach like 4 or 5 times before just knocking him the fuck out and then shooting up a bar. And he's like sort of swilling vodka solemnly. It looked like he was on Quaaludes.
He was looted out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was way too good of acting to not be actually pills.
So he gets thrown in. Brian James, the evil military advisor, throws him in the brig, and it's there he meets like the right hand man to the secret rebel leader, who knows where the secret rebel base is, and then also American journalist, I'm putting that in quotation marks, M. Emmett Walsh, who's this like flinty guy who gets thrown in. He's like, "You commie bastards! Why did you give these people freedom?"
It's literally like also the most perfect portrayal of like conflict journalists who are all fucking psychopaths. Like, if you want to cover a war or a conflict, I really think you should only be allowed to do it for a year, because it is one of those professions that attracts like actual monomaniacally like insane people. And he's like a perfect portrayal of that.
Yes, they don't do a very good job. They don't do a very good job of anything in this movie. But one of the things they do a very bad job of is establishing why they've thrown Emmett Walsh in jail, or that he's even a journalist. You really kind of have to squint at it to make any of it sense. And I think what they're trying to get across in this movie, from a scene where before Dolph Lundgren gets thrown in, he's walking through this base, and you can hear the hot licks of Little Richard somewhere.
R.I.P.
And then later on, after he's in jail, they throw M.M. Walsh in with him, and he's yelling, "You commie bastards!" And then they show Brian James looking at a tape recorder that M.M. Walsh had. He presses a button, and it starts playing the rock and roll, and he reacts like a vampire who has seen garlic. He's like, he hits it. Because this movie, over the course of it, we will find, has a very strong theme of rock and roll is what will defeat communism.
Well, this was actually a huge part, too. This was a huge part of, like, the kind of cultural war that that the anti-communists did. They were like, we have rock and roll on the blue jeans. And there's a friend of mine made T-shirts that just say punk is CIA. And it is kind of true. Well, you read about the history of it, particularly, like, with communist Germany.
Yeah. Well, no, there's a podcast now about that song by the Scorpions, Winds of Change, which is might have literally been written by the CIA.
Right. I know. Red Scorpions. How deep does this rabbit hole go, folks?
Yeah.
This is like the anti-communist network. Its tentacles are everywhere.
But from what I was able to glean, they arrested M. Emmett Walsh, the journalist, for playing rock and roll in public. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't do that. You're going to make them all stop being loyal communist subjects if they hear too much rock and roll.
Little Richard is returned to a lot in this movie, and I think they only got the rights for one song.
Yeah.
So it's just played at least 3 times in this movie.
Yeah.
And I had to look this up. This movie did come out a year after
Predator.
A year after John McTiernan's masterpiece Predator, of which we all know is, another that also depicts CIA anti-communist black ops. This time in Central America, but is a 1,000 times a better movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Predator's a perfect film up and down.
That's the thing too, is that like there is a rainbow of like Cold War anti-communist propaganda from this period, and this is just such a turd compared to so many of them.
Yeah, it was great movies. And also, like, Predator was a little bit more artful, and both in its use of the Little Richard song, and one of my favorite scenes in motion picture history
the helicopter.
is when they're flying the Hueys into the jungle, and they're just blasting that
sexual tyrannosaurus,
blasting that Little Richard, blasting Long Tall Sally, chewing Shaw, spitting Shaw, telling dirty jokes with your friends, but
it's rocking as well.
Yeah, it's just like the highest tea ever.
Yeah.
And
like,
communists don't allow dudes to rock.
No.
Is
Oh my God, no.
Dudes rock is against the Constitution.
Oh my God, no! You would be sent to the re-education camps if you were
Gulag
rocking
for you if
too
you
hard.
rock. No rocking.
But crucially, what I like about Predator is that, like, you know, Arnold's squad of like the highest team men ever assembled, like he views himself as a rescue squad who doesn't want to work for the CIA, and he's like, we're here to like save people who are being held hostage or whatever, and then acts like very like indignant when it turns out that the CIA was just using them to like just wipe out some like rebel group in the jungle. He's like, damn it, how could you do this to us? It's just like, oh no, when I was being sent into the jungle to kill people, I thought it was for a good reason.
Yeah, right.
You know,
I was rescuing folks.
And you know what? Like,
I was a first responder.
And you know, like, this movie is very much in the same way because it's about Dolph Lundgren, who's like the ultimate commando, who's like he's Mother Russia's greatest killing machine. But you know, he becomes disillusioned. Like, he's been trained to be a Spetsnaz officer.
Yeah.
And then he becomes
It's like
disillusioned literally the first time they give him a job to do.
Which means he just spent the last 10 years in Afghanistan just burning down villages.
Yeah. And then like they send him to do this one mission, and he's like, God, I can't help but get the feeling that like maybe we're the bad guys here. Like, you know, and it's just like, yeah, like my entire job is just AKing entire villages of people. But then he's just like, wait a second.
Yeah, they're not
maybe this is wrong.
They're not exactly clear either as to why this is his first "Are we the baddies" moment. Unless it's the Little Richard.
I think it's Little Richard.
Little
I
Richard.
honestly think
Little
that's
Richard.
it. I think
it's implied
it's
that
like,
literally the cultural thing.
Yeah, like the rock and roll like deprogrammed him or reprogrammed him or something like that.
Rock and roll, and then also at a later point in the movie, using cuss words.
Yes,
this is another very important part of the anti-communist propaganda. Yeah. Is that like there's
you can do swears. You can do swears.
So essentially, Dolph helps the revolutionary guy and Emmett Walsh break out of Russian prison, and he breaks them out and like takes them into the bush, and like there's a chase scene, and they're being chased by the troops, and he helps them get away. Of course, only like to provide. He's like pretending to be a deserter, only to provide cover for his true mission, which is the assassination of Jonas Savimbi. Right, so that there's a scene where like after they've escaped from like the first wave of Russian and Cuban soldiers, they're sitting by the campfire. You know, they're in the bush. Doing a hike to the secret rebel base, and Emmett Walsh just has this like sitting by the campfire, and he has this whole thing where he's like, wish I could have a bacon cheeseburger right now. I'd like nothing. God, you probably don't know anything about that, do you, Ivan? And then he's just like, listen, I'll fucking curse whatever I want to. That's freedom of speech, but you probably wouldn't know anything about that, you Russian bastard, you motherfucking cunt shit, dick, fuck, piss. And he's like, yeah, that's freedom, baby.
Yeah,
that's freedom.
He's just listing sitting around the fire talking about all the great things about America.
And it's like it's okay, rock and roll music.
It's a Dennis Leary routine.
Yes. Yeah. Mocha chicka fucking latte. That's freedom to me, buddy. So yeah, he's like using cuss words. So he's exposed Dolph, the Spetsnaz commando, to Funky Pete's, and the unbridled sort of libidinal liberty of using dirty language around a campfire with your friends. And then I was kind of hoping, like, you know, also another big part of it, I was hoping Emmett Walsh would talk about, like, you know, you get, like in America, you can watch a girl lick a lollipop or something like that.
You know, if you go to a girls' gymnastics meet, they don't ask you if you're a parent; they just assume it. You can just stay there all day.
Another digression about the foul language in this movie. There's a great in the Wikipedia page for this film under the controversy tab. It says here, producer Jack Abramoff later claimed that he did not intend the film to contain so much violence and profanity, blaming the director. He established a short-lived Committee for Traditional Jewish Values in Entertainment to release films more in line with his values, but he later abandoned the project, feeling it would be unfeasible. Yeah, it'd be unfeasible because you want to make good movies that people like. They're gonna have to have some nudity, some cuss words, and some shooting. But what I like about this is that like Abramoff is going against the only attractive part of anti-communist propaganda is he's like, can we sell this message without cool violence, cuss words, and nudity?
No.
And there's not even any nudity in this movie.
No, there's not a sexy interest. There's
no love interest at all. Like Dolph is just a robot.
Yeah, it's pure.
And
dudes.
that, you know, he's just he sees the true nature of the world, and he's like, well, we'll get to his deprogramming process is a long one.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can't. The Abramoff, he has to have that stuff because this movie makes the case very explicitly that, hey, human personal self-expression, it's entirely tied in with capitalism. Like, you cannot be yourself. You cannot be a free person unless you are listening to rock and roll, eating a damn cheeseburger, ogling a hot dame, and having your eyeballs pop out of your head and bang together on their stalks. It's full indulgence. The communism is not cool. Like, that's the big argument. It has really little to do with any kind of real notions of freedom. They're not cool. They got to stick up their butt. They can't relax. They can't vibe because they don't like consumption. They don't like consumerism. And that's how else could you express yourself?
Yeah, and being a slobbering, self-indulgent, vulgar
exactly.
individualist is the only way to be free.
The only way to be free.
And Emmett Walsh is the perfect avatar of a slovenly, foul-mouthed, but freedom-loving American.
Yes.
You know, and like he of course, he is he's the CIA journalist. I mean, he might as well have said, I'm in the country to, like, document the local flora and fauna or something. Like, I'm just a bird watcher.
Every once in a while, he'll be narrating, like, with this extremely purple prose, like, all of the violence and like, it's like, yeah, this is what they're like.
Yeah, no, he has a tape recorder where he's supposedly filing his journalism reports, and he's just like, I've never felt loathing before this day of when I see what the heartless Red has done to these, like these defenseless villagers or whatever.
It is amazing though that he is so clearly, obviously, a CIA agent under a journalistic cover, but they never actually say it. And you'd think they wouldn't want to either, or even intimate it, because it undermines their point. But there's no other way to depict that guy.
Yeah.
Like, he has to, because that's what the person doing that would only be like on a side, and that means that you're coordinated with, like, the foreign policy of your government.
Then, like, as soon as shit goes down, he's busting out a shotgun and just shooting, just blowing up Russians.
A shotgun that previously they shot Brian James with during the escape. Brian James didn't even he got winged, and the same shotgun was fired at a truck, and it exploded. It was good. That is
really the only, like, really redeeming part of this movie. The only thing that they're really good at is the melee scenes.
Yeah, because they were blowing up a bunch of surplus South African military equipment.
And that just looks cool.
Yeah.
Another thread to this movie is, like, the production of it was, like, I mean, again, this is a movie that we've financed through, like, incredibly shady sources of money, like, as a straight up propaganda film, not just on behalf of, like, this global anti-communist message, but literally on behalf of the South African apartheid government, who provided much of the military equipment and probably financing for the movie. But the production itself, would it surprise you, was a total disaster. And then, like, most of the actors on the movie claim that they were either paid a single fee up front and never got any residuals from the performance, or just simply were not paid at all. And one of the actors,
capitalism, baby.
Yeah, one of the actors in the movie is the guy who plays the Cuban military advisor. This guy, his name is
it's Tony Baloney style. It's that Italian. It's maximum levels of
Carmen
Italian.
Argenziano.
Yeah, hey, Carmen Argenziano.
He looks like an Italian Michael Ironside,
yeah.
but he's playing a Cuban military advisor. Who says, like, of the film, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. It was a very hard shoot. We were all worn out, so no one made a stink. And then he also said that he was
also because you're stuck in like rural Africa.
And no, like he says that, like, while he was filming the movie, he was like, "Oh, it's produced by these two nice Jewish boys from Beverly Hills." He assumed that they would just be Hollywood libs.
Yeah.
And then he gets on set, and it's like the fucking it's like the bounty hunter scene from Empire Strikes Back for, like, every fucking, like, psycho right wing death squad. Like,
there's like a bunch of Rhodesian mercenaries, like Mossad guys, and some, like, Operation Condor dudes.
And he was like,
I just love the idea. Like, it's the most American 1980s Hollywood thing in the world to openly break the boycott of South Africa in flagrant violation of any sort of support for the abolition of apartheid because you needed things to blow up.
No, he said, Carmen Argenziano says that many of the men, he subsequently said, like, being on the set of this movie, that many of the men who played the Russian and Cuban soldiers were actual SADF soldiers. So, like, not only were they loaning out fucking, like, jeeps and tanks and shit, they were, like, using actual South African soldiers to play parts in this movie. And he says here, we heard that very right-wing South African money was helping fund this movie. It wasn't very clear. We were pretty upset about the source of the money. We thought we were misled. We were shocked that these brothers who we thought were showbiz liberals, Beverly Hills Jewish kids, were doing this.
I'm talking to a guy who says he tried to kill Charles de Gaulle once. What the fuck?
No, it's funny because, like, Abramoff is an interesting figure because, like I said, he comes from Hollywood, but was like always this very like right wing Jewish kid. He was like both the sort of
Stephen Miller type.
yeah, he was a proto like Ben Shapiro and Steve Bannon, in that like he always had these aspirations to both also like be a part of politics and like be a K Street guy, but like what his real dream was to be a wheeler and dealer in Hollywood and make like a right wing Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah,
like make a movie that would have that level of cultural impact, but
Wouldn't it
also
be a big
be
mocker?
like just straight up right wing propaganda.
But it's also like it's weirdly like with the profanity issue too. Like he was a like true right winger, both economically and socially, which is insane because he makes a dumb movie full of explosions and curse words. Like he's like I don't buy that he opposed the way the movie turned out.
No, I mean he said that after the fact
exactly.
to justify the fact that it was a giant stink bomb.
Yeah.
And he was just like, oh well, the reason not enough people saw this movie is there was too many F words and shooting in it. Where I was like, that's the only thing.
And he still wanted like credibility for being like a nice conservative person. who had nice Jewish values.
Yeah. So as the film progressed, like so Dolph gets taken to the secret base and he meets Jonas Savimbi. And then totally botches his assassination.
Really bad job. Makes you wonder.
Completely bungles
It's
it.
really
Are we
bad.
sure this isn't the JV Spetsnaz squad that he's on?
There's a point that he was where he was supposed to be sneaking around.
Oh God!
Which
He
is-
he sneaks into the hut of the Jonas Savimbi character, and it's like Frankenstein sneaking downstairs to get something out of the fridge at midnight.
Yeah, it
Just
was
lumbering.
truly like I mean, and Dolph Lundgren is
He's
pretty
a foot
good
taller
at,
than
at,
everyone
at
else in the
walking
movie. That doesn't help.
at walking with purpose.
Yeah.
At standing, he's very good at standing. He can also run and walk sometimes. Sneaking,
Not sneaky.
he does
No,
not know
a
how
lot
to.
of grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's knocking glasses off the shelves. It's
So of
just
course they catch him.
yeah, they catch him and then for some reason don't execute him on the spot.
No, as a troll.
Okay.
They said that. They said,
yeah, they said-
we're going to leave him for your people, so they get owned.
Yeah, as a testament to like the living embarrassment of the humiliation of like the Russian military.
Yeah.
So then he's sent back to like his people, who immediately put him in chains, strip him nude, and then hang him in a dungeon. And I will give the movie credit as an entry in the canon of 80s action film. It does deliver on the beefcake and the homoeroticism.
Oh, yeah.
Because he is tortured by the Cuban advisor.
Man,
in a
that is the
very,
weirdest scene in the movie.
very
is.
homoerotic scene
Yeah.
where
They both look like they're hard.
And they both look like they're coming.
Yes.
Like their faces, they're in this agony of ecstasy.
So like they bring in another Cuban advisor who's the torture advisor after he's been stripped of his rank in Spetsnaz, and like
For bungling.
The head Russian guy is like, you are no longer Spetsnaz, and he's like, really, please, can I can I still
guys.
have the can I still wear the t-shirt? And they're like, no.
Can I keep the knife that shoots out on a spring? Because
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
No. So he's disgraced, and then they hand him over to be tortured by the Cubans for some reason. And the Cuban method of torture is just like this guy has unfurls his set of beautiful stainless steel needles.
Yeah.
And his torture method is that he just finds a fatty part of Dolph's just sort of chiseled physique. He finds a good chunk of muscle and just starts like on like a very surface
Very
level,
slowly.
very slowly sticking needles through him.
I can stick these into you all night.
And through so that they come
Yeah,
out the other
yeah,
end.
the other
They
end.
stick. And like that's a sex thing. That's not a torture. I saw that on Real Sex when I was a kid. They like sickos do that shit and they get off on it. They love it. They love it.
Communists do it.
And the whole time he's doing it, they cut to him and he's like, oh. And they cut to Dolph, and Dolph is like, oh. And so he's bristling with these things. Like I said, not even any blood's coming out of them.
No.
Like it is like the way you would do it if you were going to like do Pain Olympics or something. Or like
Yeah.
hang a guy off of those belt things they have on their
I
back.
say, like, I'm a listener, if you're going to do blood and needle play, like, please know what you're doing.
That's right.
Please use sterilized
Absolutely.
equipment.
Yeah,
It can go wrong.
Safety first.
Safety first. Yeah.
Safe can't go.
Wouldn't you know it? Before the guy has a chance to like really turn him into a pincushion, of
And
course.
come. Before he can come.
Yeah, before anyone comes, Dolph is able to break out of this torture situation, and then goes on sort of like he's just like walks barefoot into the desert and does sort of like a pseudo walkabout where he gets stung by scorpions in the middle of the night. He's just
like a bunch of them. He
a
falls
whole
down and
bunch
just
of 'em.
wakes up covered in scorpions.
And like they sting the shit out of him, and it's just like, wow, this is the one thing we didn't want to happen. When I wandered into the African desert in the middle of the night, I was really hoping not to get stung by scorpions.
It was genuinely comical. It was genuinely like Sideshow Bob with the rakes, but scorpions. It was just why. First of all, how did they get there so quickly? Second of all, like they were really like coalescing in such a density upon his corded, muscly back. Like it was. I found it funny. I'll say that.
I found it hot. So then he is saved in a classic movie trope of like a guy who's like near the brink of death in the wild, in a survival scenario. Like he's stripped of all of his modern technological equipment and training, and it's just sort of like
he's ill,
dying
he
of he's been stung, he's dying of thirst and exposure. He is sort of adopted and taken under the wing by one of the sort of indigenous Bushmen and his tribe of people. And then like a good chunk of like the second third of this movie is just Dolph hanging out with his Bushman friend, who teaches him how to
vibe.
Yeah, he just teaches him how to hunt a warthog.
Yeah.
This was supposed to be, I think, the stand-in for the dude's rock of capitalism, but it didn't quite work. It was more of a paternal thing,
Well, part of the problem is that they don't speak to each other and they don't really ever establish a rapport.
Also, Dolph is a moron.
And he's a moron.
He keeps just speaking to him in Russian or English.
It's like how do you think this guy would know this languages?
He's not trying any body language at all. It doesn't occur to him to point. He's like a dog, how like a dog doesn't understand the concept of pointing.
Yeah, they look
it just
at the finger
stares at
and
your
not
finger.
where you're looking. Yeah. But the real thing that bungles it is that another classic trope is they do a spirit quest. They smoke scorpions and like put
they milk them for their venom.
Them. Oh right, milk them and then put it into a gourd type.
Gourd type. Yeah.
They do Coachella.
It's Coachella.
No, he has a Coachella experience in the desert.
Yes.
With these Bushmen who teach him how to survive, in the sub-Saharan heat and sort of bush scrub, and then they give him a tattoo. They give him a tribal tattoo
of a scorpion.
They leave the spirit quest experience completely on the ground.
True.
There's no cool drug.
They show him drinking the stuff and then like being kind of like sweating. They don't show his point of view, which is the whole point of those scenes.
Yeah, I mean it's really just leaving that on the table. Also, I feel like that's a very cheap thing to film. All you got to do is put some weird
just put a gel over the lens of the camera and then spin it around a little bit.
Let him stumble.
Yeah, they couldn't even bother with that. They just show him sweating. They give him the tattoo, and then the next morning he's fine, and now he's like a warrior. Because while this is happening...
You know what? I just figured out why. Because Abramoff would have been extremely anti-drugs.
That's true. They can't show him tripping.
They can't show that drugs are fun.
Yeah, no, it's like he's miserable. He's miserable and sweating, and they're giving that to that.
And there's this implication that this is medicinal.
Yeah.
So he gets a scorpion tattoo. So he has sort of like a
scarification.
Scarification. Exactly.
Right.
One of those
tattoos are for bikers and those punk rock kids.
No, he gets official a tribal scarification, right? And he has he's sort of branded with the scorpion, and that's now his sort of his avatar because he's survived getting stung by 15 scorpions in the middle of the desert. All the while this is going on, the evil Soviet military guy, his Dolph's former boss, has been flying all over the countryside in one of those super cool Russian attack helicopters with the
Heinz,
Russian attack helicopter. Seen, of course, in Rambo: First Blood Part 2, and of course at the end of Red Dawn as well. It was like a classic piece of again, if you think back to these Cold War action movies, it was they always wanted to underscore that Russia's military was this fucking juggernaut.
Yeah.
And they have these fucking these gigantic just attack helicopters, which let's be honest, pretty intimidating, pretty badass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty awesome. They got the rockets on it, they got the fucking guns. They just lay waste to anything in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're don't cut our military funding because they're gonna
there's gonna be one of these hovering over your children's school.
Yeah, exactly. So while Dolph is having his spirit quest vision, the Russian the Heinz attack helicopter is just going from village to village, spraying it with, they're just sort of dripping like an aerosolized like blue paint or something.
They call it blue rain.
They call it blue rain, and it's never really explained, but it's clearly some sort of like Soviet version of Asian orange, I think. That's like that kills
What did we kill all those people with?
Yeah,
Asian
exactly.
orange? They got to have something like that, right? It's blue, though? I don't know.
Yes, it's Soviet blue. And yeah, and it's implied that it's going to give all the people cancer and kill their livestock and shit like that. But then, like,
Once again, shit we did.
no, I mean, like,
having the Soviets
again,
do
like,
it.
go back to the original like thing here about like, oh, like this is a movie about a Russian commando assassinating some like democratic leader or like a people's uprising. It's just like everything they portray in this is like all shit that like we did.
Yes.
like 100%.
Yeah.
And then like they spray them with blue paint, but then they also send guys in with flamethrowers to like scorch their
Guys
village.
wearing
to burn
full-body
their
tinfoil outfits.
grass huts, which I gotta say, they could probably rebuild a day or two.
There were like 2 of them, too. They
Yeah.
burned 2 grass
Yeah.
huts. And,
Yeah.
and then the real loss is the Jonas Savimbi guy, because he gets shot rescuing a girl. Although they don't
right.
show it very well, and you don't know it until
It's
later.
not shot very
If this
well.
were better propaganda, and like we could have done a much better version.
Oh,
of this movie.
absolutely.
There should have been a scene with the flamethrowers where they're just like they're torching a big pile of like we said Hall and Oates
Yes,
records.
Hall & Oates records,
Yes.
blue jeans,
Blue jeans.
Yeah,
anything cool and fun.
Budweiser, Coca-Cola, soda.
The Farrah Fawcett poster that everyone loved.
Yeah, you can see her nip.
None
Yeah.
of this decadence.
Yeah, destroyed.
No
all.
fun of any kind.
So, so like they're doing scorched earth shit. They're trying to stop people from listening to the radio and spreading like the message of freedom. But like Dolph, after their village has been razed, Dolph just walks back into the village, and they're like, Emmett Walsh, like, I can't believe it's this guy again.
This fucking guy's
This
back.
fucking Russian guy's back. What
Oh
are you-
wait! Did we skip? We skipped over the part where actually the Bush tribe also got blue rained.
Yeah, they got blue rained as well.
They were just
Let's just-
they
just
weren't
have
even
lateral
politically
damage.
involved.
Those
They were
goddamn
they were
Russians
not
don't even
they
care.
were had a non-alignment principle.
This is
whole
just how
thing.
evil
Yeah.
these awful Soviet
And also the
military
guy,
advisors.
his like his Spirit Quest Baba OJ friend, just sort of looks around. He's like, damn, that sucks. And he's still friends with Dolph Lundgren, and it never once occurs to him, apparently, as it would if I were this guy, that like, did this giant, terrifying white man bring evil into my life?
Yeah, this 7 foot tall like Scandinavian guy who just shows up randomly. Maybe that's a harbinger of like maybe that's an ill omen. Maybe that portends bad for
It's
the
like,
future.
It's just like, are these your friends? Like, what is this? Are you full of disease? Is this a smallpox blanket kind of situation? Like, it was very weird, and they just skipped over it, and the guy was just fine with it.
So basically, like the climax of the movie is that Dolph emerges from his spirit quest to help this democratic rebellion of Jonas Savimbi. Who Jonas Savimbi's been killed, he's been martyred, but like his right hand man, the guy he originally breaks out of jail, is still there. And there's a scene where like after their village has been destroyed, he's just like, we have nothing left to do but go back to our homes and sip the bitter tea in the agony of defeat. And then Dolph just goes, let's kick ass, and just racks a shotgun. And then the next scene is them overrunning the Andrew Cuomo base.
Yep. And by the way, another missed opportunity. They didn't show the Spirit Quest. They did not show Dolph kidding up, because when they show up,
Right.
snatch
No
cut to
montage.
them attacking
No
the
montage.
village or the base. He's got booty shorts on and like a billowy vest, but he's got the camouflage makeup. He's got 3 guns strapped to him. He's got a bunch of grenades.
He's doing a gender swap cosplay as Laura Croft.
Exactly.
They're
and we
such
don't
short
see
shorts.
him strapping in, which is the best scene in any movie. Like
Putting on the makeup, we don't even get to see
none
that.
of that. I know that they did it in Commando, and that's the best, but it's like it's still fun in any version.
Rambo,
Everyone
Rambo, there's
likes
Rambo too.
a
And-
makeover montage.
It is. It's a
Whether
dude's
it's
rock
Clueless
makeover.
or Predator.
Yeah.
Like you want to see the makeover.
Like,
Absolutely.
like again, this is such a pale imitation of Rambo, which is already on its own, like at least by First Blood Part 2, like insane.
Someone didn't let us
propaganda.
win.
Yeah,
And of course, the third
insane
one
revisionist
in
propaganda.
Afghanistan. Yeah, with our
Well,
brave
this was
Mujahideen
propaganda
fighters.
for the time it was made,
Yeah.
but is hilariously ill-suited to anything that came after.
Yeah.
that.
Oh boy, our
Famously,
bad.
A joke we did in our book from the hardcover to paperback editions
Yeah.
is it references Rambo 3, the film release, the VHS release of the movie. They changed the end title card where it says, this film is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters, and then for subsequent releases of the film, they changed it. This film is dedicated to the gallant people of Afghanistan. And again, in those Rambo movies, they show him sharpening that big ass knife, and it's just his
fucking
dick.
cool.
It's just like my dick is hard. His dick is hard. His dick is
Dick
sharp.
is on whore.
His dick is on hard.
Yeah.
And they give you none of that, even though Dolph is quite a specimen.
They do give him one shot of though where they visually confirm him finally breaking with his Soviet programming, where he takes his dog tags and the Cyrillic and just throws them away, indicating that he will be a dissident for the 21st century. He will be Alexander Solzhenitsyn for the for the people of Mombaka.
Mumbaka, yeah. So they overrun the Soviet military base. They overcome through this, indigenous democratic people's movement, which is in no way connected to any, foreign intelligence
not at
service
all,
or anything like that.
No idea where we found all these guns. We have no idea where they came from. And Mehmet Wall shows up at this point, just violating, any journalistic integrity, literally driving a technical with a fucking recoilless rifle on it through the barricade. I'm sorry. That is not enough impartiality for a journalist, in my opinion.
No, that is not objective when you're taking up arms and fighting in one side of conflict. Yeah. But you know what, though? You hear that little Richard.
You got to do it.
You got to do it.
You got to do it.
You got to do it. So again, so Dolph goes fully democracy, whiskey, sexy. At the end, the evil Russian guy goes, "You were Spetsnaz," and he goes, "I still am Spetsnaz. I'm just not one of you." Yeah. And it's just like, well, that kind of defeats the whole point.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point, is that you're part of the Soviet military.
Yeah, you're part of the project.
Yeah. So, yes, democracy triumphs at the end. Yeah, and then nothing bad happens. And
everything. Yeah, the government's fantastic.
And then everything turned out fine.
Nobody gets. And the funny thing is that this was propaganda, right, to help bolster the image of these the unit of rebels in Angola. And it came out in 1988, which was it was already basically a dead letter when it came out, because by that point, the war was basically over, because over the course of the second half of 1987 and into early 1988, there was this huge battle, the biggest land battle in Africa since World War II, the Battle of Quito Cuanavale, between the Marxist Angolan government and Cuba, against UNITA and South Africa. Like, it wasn't even covert. There were South African ground troops there, and they fought a back and forth, inconclusive stalemate for like 6 months. And at the end of it, neither side won definitively, but the myth of white South African military dominance,
invincibility,
was shattered. And very shortly after that, they started negotiating a drawdown. And within a few years, they'd even pulled out of Southwest Africa. So it was already fucking over on the ground when they made the movie. So it's even more a symbol of a failed movement.
Yeah, that's why you try to. Your take either has to be really hot, like really on top of it. You either have to turn out something that's so immediately germane that it's perfect, or you wait for something to happen and then you write about it.
Yeah.
Because no one wants a lukewarm take.
Yeah.
And that's like, just timing wise, very bad idea to make a movie about this particular subject.
But again, it is. Essentially, almost every 80s action film was propaganda for the United States and Israel. Like, for the most part, like the people involved in producing them, writing them, directing them were like self-consciously aware of this fact. I mean, if you like the other Chuck Norris movies the director did, Missing in Action and Invasion USA.
Invasion USA is the best because it's another thing where it's just the Cubans and the Russians.
The bad guys, a Russian military advisor.
Yeah, and they just bring a bunch of guys to go to Florida and just blow up malls and just drive-by shoot suburban neighborhoods.
That's the big thing, though, about communists is that they hate shopping.
They hate it.
And there's a scene where like Chuck Norris drives a pickup truck into a mall and just pops out with two Uzis and just starts spraying all like the Cubans were attacking the shopping mall. Yeah. And the first scene in Invasion USA of like the real beginning of the military operation is like the Russian guys on like he's on a truck with all his like his commandos, and they just pull down this like quiet suburban street in the middle of the night, and it's Christmas time, and they're like looking in the window of these people like wrapping presents, and like it's
Norman
just
Rockwell
nice.
shit.
Yeah, and then he just takes a fucking bazooka and just shoots it through the fucking front door of these people's houses. It owns.
Yeah.
This movie not so much.
No.
This movie was this was very dry,
Yeah.
even by 80s action movie standards. But I think it is funny to think about it. Is like as goofy as all this shit is, it really was like the goofiness is like almost hides like how sinister the shit behind it really is.
Oh yeah.
Is because like this really was in Abramoff directly, and then working with the South African military, and like I said, this International Freedom Fund, which was this kind of umbrella conference of like of global anti-communist right-wing terrorist groups and militaries and
Like a global tiger camp.
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
From American Tabloid.
that one of the goofier, like one of the efforts that was, that came out of it was not just perhaps assassinating the prime minister of Sweden.
It was also
it
Red
was
Scorpion.
also the film Red Scorpion starring Dolph Lundgren.
Did you guys ever see Red Heat with
Oh, of course,
Schwarzenegger?
of course.
Where he plays a Russian cop who goes to Chicago to hunt down a criminal with the help of
Jim Belushi.
freewheeling Chicago cop Jim Belushi.
It's been a while, but I remember that Belushi joint.
It's the exact same deal where the Russians are square. Like that in the 80s,
Yeah.
the argument, it wasn't really anything about economics at all. It was purely Russians don't like fun.
Mm-hmm.
They're all just boring,
And-
and that if you want communism, everyone's going to be boring like
Yeah.
these boring
And this
guys.
was like,
you need to be swearing. You need to be eating a hot dog messily.
And like,
you need to do a bad job you need to do a shitty job at your job and not care.
And this was, counter propaganda to so much of American films that had come before that, which was like, I guess, tagged with like a sort of a tinge of the counterculture, which was the sort of slobs for snobs thing.
Yep.
Animal House, Caddyshack, movies like that, where it was like the squares, like I'm thinking in Animal House in particular, like the Omega House, Kevin Bacon, Niedermeyer, like they were associated with like American, like fascistic, like
Yeah.
right-wing military authoritarianism, and then sort of like weird esoteric rituals, but also anti-rock and roll, anti having a good time, anti just like being a slob, being a weirdo, letting it hang out. Like they were that was the symbol of like right-wing like villainy. And then in like the 80s, which keep in mind, like under the Reagan administration, they basically restarted the Cold War.
Yes.
And like the counter propaganda to that was like you said, Matt, it was like, no. It's like the Reds, the Soviets.
They're the squares.
They're the squares.
They're the
They're
Niedermeyers.
the uptight, like persnickety Niedermeyer type
Yeah.
characters who
Yeah.
are like, all they care about is polishing the brass buttons on their fucking military uniforms.
Not even that explicitly though. I don't even think they needed to throw in Russians to make kind of Cold War propaganda. I think John Hughes is one of the most successful Cold War propagandists.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And like when you think about like something like Ferris Bueller, who definitely grew up to become Patrick Bateman.
Oh, sure.
Like it's like, well, that was an incredibly. I mean, they even. Oh, remember John Lennon? Remember this? All you need is love, and I am the walrus, and we're gonna make some references to some kind of classic boomer shit. But also know that what we took out of those social movements, what we achieved was a certain amount of freedom and the ability to antagonize squares. And you know who the squares are. They're the authoritarians, i.e. the communists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helps that there's no way for most Americans, Westerners, to conceive of personal expression outside of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just say you can't buy shit. You can't buy what you want. And that does half the work, because what else is there? What else makes you other than your consumption
I
pattern?
think some of the most effective 1980s Cold War propaganda was completely unmoored from geopolitics.
Well, that's why John Hughes
Yeah.
is such a good propagandist,
And this is
and
very
Joseph
bad.
Zito
Yeah.
and Jack Abramoff are such
Very
incompetent
bad.
fucking hacks.
Yeah.
Is because like they don't understand that like if when you're writing a screenplay and filming it, like if you front load all of that shit, it's like it's so obvious and ham-fisted it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Whereas like you bring up Ferris Bueller, to me, like the scene in that movie that like sums up everything about like the Reagan turn in the 80s as a kind of like a moment of individual liberation for like the capitalist forces is the scene where Ferris Bueller takes over an entire parade in the city of Chicago and makes a city of people dance for his amusement. What was it? Twist and Shout, like to that boomer, like
Again,
the movie that his parent, like the music that his parents probably fucked to.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like the whole city of Chicago is dancing and cheering for this juvenile delinquent,
This little pisser,
this little asshole. No, the true hero of Ferris Bueller's Day Off is, of course, the principal, played by actual pedophile Jeffrey Jones.
Yes.
Who's just simply wants this spoiled rich kid.
Yeah,
just
hey, face some fucking consequences. How about that? How about
Piece
some
of
consequences
shit.
for your fucking actions?
Who just bullies his depressed friend into fucking enabling him.
Yes, exactly. And then like, drives his friend to a suicide attempt.
Yes.
Just because he sees his friend as like his sort of...
I need the car.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all instrumental. Our
need the
relationships
car.
are totally instrumental. Like, I like you, but at the degree to which you do something for me. That's it.
No, but like, Ferris Bueller was a it's so effective because it's not obvious at all, and I don't think even John Hughes is writing it as like, I'm going to show like what what American freedom stands for. But what he does is create a document that like I think perfectly captures our vision of like freedom in that era and what we were fighting for.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, is to be a rich little snot who can flout authority at will and just essentially do what you want all the time.
And now every's Ferris Bueller.
Get away
and
with
it's great.
everything.
Get away with all of it.
Get
And
away
now
with everything.
Everyone's Ferris Bueller and everything is great. I think we could agree.
But yeah, like all those John Hughes movies is that like he was in his own sly way making it hip to be square again.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of like Midwestern suburban vision of America is like the protagonists of all of those John Hughes movies. If you project in your head what happens to them after the movie, they all become like Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton. They all run for office, and I was like the Republican senator from Indiana or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's really freakish when you go back and watch those because it's like this person is awful. His sister is right.
Yes. No, the sister's right. Rooney is correct.
Yeah.
Sterilize and imprison Ferris Bueller.
His parents are negligent to the point where they are raising a sociopath.
Yes. So yes, you know, like as long as we're talking about this, coming out of like the late '80s, and what I think is interesting about this is, like you said, Matt, by the time this movie hit theaters, like the cause that they were ostensibly supposed to be supporting was already basically defeated.
They were late to the
party, and then also Abramoff, in reading about the history of this movie, only decided to take a stab at Hollywood because he felt like all of his like crackpot like fascist right-wing lobbying efforts had crapped out because like his good friend and like the guy he admired, Oliver North, had to end up going to prison.
What the hell?
And like,
Ollie.
And he thought like, by the second term of the Reagan administration, they thought old Uncle Ronnie had sort of gone soft.
Yeah.
And
that's true because when he started, there was a sense on the hard right of betrayal of the Reagan administration when they started negotiations again with Gorbachev. They were very unhappy about that.
And then also allowing the sort of anti-apartheid movement to gain such purchase in America and become like a big like sort of cultural movement of like where everyone had to be involved or like I won't play Sun City and stuff like that or like an economic and cultural
one of
boycott.
the actual only times, by the way, that artists saying anything about a political cause was useful. Because it actually, like, one, it did raise awareness, but more importantly, it says, like, this is the tactic that we're taking is an economic boycott. And we can thank Little Steven for that.
Shout out Little Steven. I was just about to say, you know who broke that or tried to?
No, he did it.
Oh,
No. Who tried to break the cultural boycott? Paul Simon.
Oh, he did.
He did.
Graceland.
Yeah. And then the reason he gave for it is he said, my good friend Henry Kissinger assured me it was okay.
Yeah.
Because Mandela is a communist.
Yes, because Mandela is a communist.
And he wrapped it up in like sweet international kind of bourgeois cosmopolitan liberalism where he's like, but look, it's Lady Smith Black
Mambazo. Yeah.
How can it be racist
who are
for
good
black?
tips?
Yeah. I have black friends.
You know who's
in my
also
band.
very close friends with Paul Simon? Lorne Michaels.
Yes.
He wrote the song I'm Going to Graceland. He made it his son in the song, but it was really a road trip him and Lorne Michaels took to Graceland. So him, Kissinger, Lorne Michaels.
Oh,
how deep does it go?
What a group there.
Yeah.
How deep does it go? Like I said, the strands of this anti-communist spiderweb
goes out in all directions.
They connect in all of, again, like it's all just projection of everything that they accuse like international communism of attempting to do.
Yeah. No, they were
literally doing all of it.
They were
themselves.
doing it way more effectively than the Soviets were. When the Cuba went into Angola, it caught the Soviets by surprise. They had to like run in afterwards. There were many fewer Soviet advisors than there were Cuban soldiers in Angola because it was not a coordinated thing. The Soviets, their big Cold War military adventure was Afghanistan, which was on their border. They did not have any real interest or even capacity to project power the way we did.
They were not in a good position by that point economically. They
were already circling the drain.
And a lot of what they did do that was useful was literally just provide like subsidies to
like Cuba had the
Cuba,
food subsidies and stuff.
Which is why again most of the like horrible like starvation what they call the lean years or whatever happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the embargo was still on. So there's just like, oh shit. Like this has
the special period in Cuba.
But I was gonna say like coming out of the 80s, both the star and series of film that does most flout the right wing drift of all of the direction of like all of the most like the Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris era was Steven Seagal, who from for his stretch of
the
movies,
environmentalists
for like we're all very like comparatively left wing. Like his first movie Above the Law is about like the fucking like CIA like heroin running in Vietnam and like explicitly about like like I said, this Condor network where
it starts with a clip of Nixon.
Yeah.
That's the first shot in Above the Law.
And then by his later ones, like the last real one he got a chance to do, where he like by then Seagal was such a fucking monster and a psychopath that he had burned every fucking bridge in Hollywood. And like, he used his last push, like the last ounce of like any credibility he had with his agency or anything in Hollywood, just to include the monologue at the end of On Deadly Ground, where he gives a speech about the importance of environmentalism and fighting back against oil companies who are like, or pillaging like indigenous lands from the Inuit peoples.
I mean, ultimately, he does have like the kind of chaotic guru energy where it's like he is worried about global climate change. Also, probably traffics women. Like it's
100%.
Not even probably.
It's very guru energy.
Yeah. And now he wrote that book, The Shadow of the Wolf, which is just QAnon shit.
Yeah.
Pure QAnon shit.
And then again, hilariously, because I follow him on Instagram, Seagal has been like really like all in on like the George Floyd protests and stuff, and being like, I can't believe that these killer cops have dishonored themselves and their badges. Like, we have to support these people. How could you call yourself a man and do this? Like, dude, you were doing a TV show with Joe Arpaio where you ran a tank over someone's house. It's like, what the fuck?
He was, my favorite thing is where he just talked about having what he called cop sense. Which was just racial profiling.
I got that cop sense. I see a guy and I just know.
I don't know what it is. I just know it's this guy. He's going to be a problem. I can tell from 100 yards away. This guy's going to be the problem.
We should do an episode on the reality show you did.
We should
about
let's do that.
Lawman.
We should.
It only had what?
Continue.
It was only 2 seasons. They had to stop it because of the thing where he killed someone's dog with a tank.
He got sued.
He was working with Sheriff Joe.
Yeah.
We should though continue and make a series of our Cold War propaganda stuff, and I want to do the post Cold War propaganda, Red Sparrow.
Interesting.
Because this is what happens when the Cold War is over, and they were like, God, that was such a good time for movies. Can we just do that again, completely detached from the actual political realities of our moment? Which worked a little bit because they were trying to revive the Cold War because of the Hillary stuff, but it was the most insane, convoluted thing in the world. But people are nostalgic for that. They're like, remember when we had this great enemy?
If it will take another sort of domestic Gladio, Operation Condor, to bring back actual gun blanks being fired in movies, bullet squibs.
See, that's the thing.
Bullet
This movie is
squibs
dog shit.
and gratuitous nudity and bullet squibs.
This movie is
and
dog shit.
homoeroticism
It's very
in
poorly
action
directed. They miss significant shots. Like, you have to piece a lot of it together, like after you see it, because they didn't establish it. But when they shoot people, there's puffs. You get the flying, the mist,
smoke,
the mist.
Also, the kickback was like really intense.
The guns are really firing. They're not pretending to fire them so that they can add a flash later in CGI. And it's like, it's already been talked about a lot about that there's no nudity in movies anymore. There's also no fucking blood in movies
There's
anymore.
no blood. There's no sex.
And it's like, God, it's just, that movie is dog shit, but it's like, I'm sorry, those action scenes to me are better than, at this point, after 3 of them, the perfectly smooth engine of like a John Wick thing where he just kills 50 guys and it's all CGI headshots. Just him like going to town with a big fake gun that has 2 different fucking magazines. It had a top loading like Lewis gun drum mag, and then a big bottom like vertical magazine with 2 barrels. And he's blowing guys' arms off, and they're flying. And it's like, give me some of this. They literally did not make them that way.
Literally, like
And it was $14 million.
This movie was so bad, and it was still entertaining just because the melee scenes were
because
amazing.
they have gravity, because
that's fun
the
to
cars
watch.
are really driving,
That
they're
is
really
fun to
crashing.
watch.
The bombs are really going
All
off.
the jeeps and tanks were really used to quell uprisings in Soweto. And
Yeah, they really feel
Real
the
bullets that
authenticity.
really killed Steve Biko.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, in many ways, it was a verite film.
Yes.
No, it's a
kind of.
very film in so many ways.
Yeah.
Like I said, down to the inclusion of actual South African Defense Forces soldiers playing extras in this fucking movie.
That's like the reverse of like Leni Riefenstahl using actual campers. That's like and then of course claiming later that she had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Courtesy of the International Freedom Fund and the basically anti-communist league of supervillains.
It occurs to me, though, that some of our younger listeners might not know who Jack Abramoff is and what happened to him later.
No, he dated Lena Dunham. We already discussed this.
Jack Abramoff became a super lobbyist.
Yeah.
And his deal was one of his big scams. It was essentially a scam, like most lobbying is, because like specific industries in general will of course get preferential treatment from government based on their market size and influence or whatever. But individual firms might not, and so that's where the lobbyist comes in. And Jack Abramoff got in trouble during the Bush years. He was one of those Bush era scandals that everyone who was on the blogs was following minutely.
Casino Jack.
Yeah, Casino Jack is that he would get Indian tribes to pay him to lobby on their behalf to either defeat or allow to win different like local efforts to legalize or criminalize gambling, depending on what the tribes would want. And they just built these tribes for millions.
Like they would take money from one tribe, to either support or like try to stop another tribe from like getting gambling rights on their lands or whatever, and then take money from the other tribe and just like it would take money from all sides, and just like play them off against each other. And then eventually Jack Abramoff did go to jail because of this. He was basically one of the only guys from the Bush era who went to jail as a result of any of this. But it was him, Ralph Reed, and Tom DeLay.
Yes,
were like the big triumvirate.
Yeah, they
of,
had
like,
that
Bush
restaurant
era. Signatures, the DC Steakhouse.
Yes.
There was another Jack Abramoff joint that was like, dude, if you really want to know how fucking diseased the city Washington D.C. was during the Bush era, the Jack Abramoff Steakhouse called Signatures was like the hottest.
It was
spot
the
in town.
spot to be.
It was the place to be seen.
It was Chasen's in like 30s Hollywood. It's like it's the hottest ticket in town. It was like Sardi's after the Tonys. If we want to really wrap everything up perfectly, they made a movie. They made a theatrical film about Jack Abramoff called
Starring
Jack, starring Kevin Spacey.
That's right.
Everything comes together.
I think we got it. Yeah.
There we go. But I would say Kevin Spacey is part of a different spider web of.
I don't know. I think if you look close,
go down deep enough,
I think they are all connected.
They're all connected.
I think they're all connected. I mean, the personnel might change, and the fronts and stuff, but like the general interests align. I guess I would say.
But yes, just in conclusion, Red Scorpion, a film financed probably by the same people who assassinated Sweden's prime minister.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it's probably starring some of the same people who were in on that op as well. At least they're extras in the background.
Yeah. Craig Williamson, there he is. Holy shit!
So there we go. Red Scorpion again, and the global anti-communism spider web. Its effects still with us to this day.
Oh, for sure.
And we are untangling that web for you here on the show. So until next time, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.